How the precepts in the Peacemaker became Doctrine and Covenants 132. The spirit of Elijah taught as a stepping stone in the early days of the church. It was so easy for Brigham, Orson Pratt, and others to take Jacob's doctrines and deliver them to the saints, couched in their own terminology, but with the declaration that polygamy in the church had been introduced by Joseph. The prophet, of course, was dead and could no longer defend himself. Brigham Young, who was secretly involved in polygamy even while Joseph was living, began to pave the way for it to be practiced publicly early in 1845. As part of that effort, a new program was promoted which was called The Spirit of Elijah. Bishop John D. Lee, Brigham Young's adopted son, tells how Young started the program by having the Spirit of Elijah taught in Nauvoo. Lee asserted, in the winter of 1845, meetings were held all over the city of Nauvoo, and the Spirit of Elijah was taught in the different families as a foundation to the order of celestial marriage, as well as the law of adoption. Many families entered into covenants with each other, the man to stand by his wife, and the woman to cleave unto her husband, and the children to be adopted to the parents. I was one of those who entered into covenants to stand by my family, to cleave to them through time and eternity. Others refused to enter into these obligations, but agreed to separate from each other, dividing their substance and mutually dissolving their former relations, marriages, on friendly terms. Some have mutually agreed to exchange wives and have been sealed to each other as husband and wife by virtue and authority of the holy priesthood. One of Brigham's brothers, Lorenzo Young, now a bishop, made an exchange of wives with Mr. Isaac Decker. They both seemed happy in the exchange of wives. This doctrine extends much further. All persons are required to be adopted to some of the leading men of the church. In this, however, they have the right of choice, thus forming the links of the chain of priesthood back to the father Adam, and so on to the second coming of the Messiah. John D. Lee, Mormonism Unveiled, or the Life and Confessions of the late Mormon Bishop John D. Lee. Lee's statement shows how bold the apostles were in introducing changes in basic church doctrines so shortly after Joseph's death. Also, it is important to notice that they were justifying their actions by incorrectly inferring that their practice of adoption of families to the leaders was a fulfillment of the prophecy that Elijah would turn the hearts of the children to the fathers and the fathers to the children by forming the links of the chain of priesthood back to Father Adam and so on. Here we see the likeness to Udney Jacob's teachings. John D. Lee's biography reveals another important factor, that polygamy was introduced to the saints by the apostles in 1845. Lee declared, the ordinance of celestial marriage was extensively practiced by men and women who had covenanted to live together, and a few men had dispensations, permissions, granted them to enter into plural marriages, which were taught to be the stepping stone to celestial exaltation. Without plural marriage, a man could not attain to the fullness of the holy priesthood and be made equal to our Savior. My second wife, Nancy Bean, was sealed to me in the winter of 1845. Plural marriages were not made public. They had to be kept still. In the spring of 1845, Rachel and Dora was sealed to me. Imagine the dynamic impact of convening meetings all over the city of Nauvoo to teach the spirit of Elijah as a step to indoctrinate the saints into the practice of polygamy for time and eternity, a doctrine strongly condemned by Joseph Smith and by the Book of Mormon, which he brought forth. The spirit of Elijah is a term which has continued to be used in the LDS Church. One LDS author has given it this definition. This is the spirit of Elijah, that we redeem our dead and connect ourselves with our fathers which are in heaven, and seal up our dead to come forth in the first resurrection. And here we want the power of Elijah to seal those who dwell on earth to those who dwell in heaven. Bruce R. McConkie, Mormon Doctrine. Here, let's examine some similarities in the teachings of the apostles and Udney Jacob in the Peacemaker. The writings of Udney Jacob and the statements of Brigham Young, Orson Pratt, Heber C. Kimball, and others are so similar that it is apparent that the LDS leaders obtained some of their beliefs from the Peacemaker, as we explore in the following examples. The claims about Elijah. Here's Jacob Udney.
It is written in Malachi, chapter 4, verses 5 and 6, Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord, and he shall turn the heart of the fathers to the children, and the heart of the children to the fathers, lest I come and smite the earth with a curse. The author of this work professes to be the teacher here foretold, and when the whole work, my complete manuscript, shall be published, and its glorious object of causing polygamy to become universal accomplished, then will the whole world know assuredly that I, Udney Jacob, am indeed the teacher foretold by the prophet Malachi more than 2,000 years ago.
Preface to the Peacemaker. And here's Mr. Brigham Young.
Joseph in his lifetime did not receive everything connected with the doctrine of redemption, but he has left the key with those who understand how to obtain and teach this great principle, and teach this great people all that is necessary for their salvation and exaltation in the celestial kingdom of our God.
Times and Seasons. 8 years after Joseph's death, Young released a polygamous time and eternity marriage document, the one we all know as LDS Doctrine and Covenants section 132, which was purported to be a copy of a copy dictated by Joseph Smith 9 years earlier. According to that document, Young in 1852 held rights which no other man on earth held at that time, which goes against Doctrine and Covenants 124 verse 124. The right to direct the sealing of marriages on earth and in heaven. Young's newly presented document stated,
And verily I say unto you, that all covenants that are not made and entered into and sealed of him who is anointed, both as well for time and for all eternity, through the medium of mine anointed, whom I have appointed on the earth to hold this power. And I have appointed unto my servant Joseph to hold this power. And there is never but one on earth at a time, on whom this power and the keys of this priesthood are conferred.
LDS Doctrine and Covenants 132 verse 7. So Young unveiled a secret document which claimed that he alone held the keys of Elijah. Young, while claiming to hold those keys, introduced the doctrine of polygamy and other new and strange dogmas, including sealings, blood atonement, and the Adam God doctrine. The new and everlasting covenant meant marriage for eternity now. Big change. Udney Jacob's plan for marriage, like those of Young's, were for time in this world and for eternity beyond the grave. He even referred to marriage after death as the everlasting covenant. Where did Young get that idea? Udney Jacob, here he is.
The earth is also defiled under the inhabitants thereof, because they have transgressed the laws, changed the ordinance, broken the everlasting covenant. That is the ordinance and covenant of marriage, spoken of in a singular number and definite manner, because there is no everlasting ordinance that man ever had the power to change. The everlasting covenant of the gospel, found first in Genesis chapter 3 verse 15, is ordered in all things, and sure, it is the covenant of life beyond the grave.
The Peacemaker. And here's Brigham Young.
For behold, I reveal unto you a new and everlasting covenant, plural or celestial marriage. And if you abide not that covenant, then ye are damned. For no one can reject this covenant and be permitted to enter into my glory.
LDS Doctrine and Covenants, section 132, verse 4. And another similarity, they both preached the supremacy of husbands. Here's Udney Jacob.
If she will seek any other guide depending on something else besides her husband, except it be the Lord who is head of all, she must be miserable. She is out of the order which God has established in the creation, and wretchedness is the inevitable fruit. Therefore the law should confine her completely under her husband's power for good, but not for evil. Has the church a right to admonish or dictate Christ? But the head of the woman is the man, and the head of the man is Christ. But according to the law of Christ, there is but one supreme governor only, the husband, who has power thereby, if his subjects, his wives, rebel, to banish them from his dominions.
The Peacemaker, 19 and 23. And of course, Mr. Brigham Young, he says,
I wish my women, wives, to understand that what I'm going to say is for them as well as others. I'm going to give you from this time, September 21st, 1856 to the 6th day of October next, for reflection, that you may determine whether you wish to stay with your husbands or not. And then I'm going to set every woman at liberty and say to them, now go your way, my woman, with the rest, go your way. And my wives have got to do one of two things, either round up their shoulders to endure the afflictions of this world and live their religion, or they may leave, for I will not have them about me. I will go into heaven alone rather than have scratching and fighting around me. True, there is a curse upon the woman that is not upon the man, namely, that her whole affection shall be towards her husband. And what is the next? He shall rule over you.
Journal of Discourses. Mary Page Eaton believes section 132 was a rehash of the Peacemaker. The similarities between the teachings of Jacob and Young were not only readily seen today, but they are observed by saints in the early church. One of those was Mary Page Eaton, widow of Apostle John E. Page. After Apostle Page's death, she married William Eaton. She joined the church in 1836 in Canada and traveled with a group of saints to Far West, Missouri, in 1838. At Far West, she married Apostle John E. Page, whose wife and 2 children had died in Missouri due to sickness brought on by persecution. John and Mary Page were driven from Far West in the spring of 1839 and arrived at Nauvoo the same year. In 1846, Mary read The Peacemaker at Nauvoo, and after reading the alleged polygamous revelation brought forth under Young's direction, LDS Doctrine and Covenants 132, she concluded that President Young had founded his polygamous celestial marriage theology upon that book. Mary expressed her belief by writing an article entitled The Foundation of Polygamy. She wrote, "When I lived in Nauvoo in 1846, I read the book on marriage. Its author was Udney H. Jacobs. He named it The Peacemaker. When I read the pretended revelation today, section 132 in the Doctrine and Covenants, I saw the same vile doctrine I read in that book, and it occurred to me, this is a rehash with a little remodeling. It, The Peacemaker, is mentioned in Volume 4, Times and Seasons, page 32, by Joseph the Martyr. He calls it an unmeaning rigmarole of nonsense, folly, and trash, and says it was written by Udney H. Jacobs on marriage. If any others of your readers have read it and compared it with the spurious revelation, they will see the sameness of the two and condemn them as Joseph did. Both teach much cruelty to women who do not obey their husband's mandates and say they shall be destroyed for an offense which the man has no punishment for, only that his wife shall be given to another man. They teach concubinage by saying the Lord gave wives and concubines to David and Solomon. I think Udney H. Jacobs could then have been punished for his obsceneness, but now it's termed a revelation? How can men believe in God or expect his mercy, who causes such misery to such loving wives? This yoke of bondage, polygamy, is obviously Satan's device. For Christ says, "Take my yoke upon you, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light." The prophet Jacob in the Book of Mormon says, "The Lord has seen the sorrow and heard the mourning of the daughters of his people who were under the bondage of polygamy. He is the same merciful God forever to all who trust in him." Mary Page Eaton, Independence, The Saints Advocate, 6th of June, 1884. The Peacemaker was also responsible for other false doctrines, including the law of adoption, where men or women were sealed to those leading the church. This was an idolatrous rejection of Christ, another way to diminish his saving mission by lifting up men, the 12, between the Lord and the people. Later, it became a popularity contest for some of the saints to choose who to be sealed to, Young, Heber, Taylor, or another. Young's crafty move in boring Joseph's and Elijah's doctrine helped him promote the same evils of old. Young would eventually take all power later in Utah, serving as church president, governor over the territory, head of the militia, the Indian agent for the federal government, and perhaps most important to him, the sole man on the earth that could sanction polygamous marriages via his supposed sealing power. See Doctrine and Covenants 132 verse 7. He then called other men to practice it. Young made the spiritual wives doctrine of the Cochranites more palatable by associating it with marriage, and with his temple rites calling it the new and everlasting covenant of marriage, covenant necessary to receive exaltation in his new kingdom out west. It was put in place with covenant signs and blood oaths used by Cain and Lamech, oaths made with Satan. Young said, "The only men who become gods, even the sons of God, are those who enter into polygamy." Journal of Discourses.